The world now stands at the edge of a crisis unlike anything seen since the height of the Cold War. Relations between the United States and Russia have deteriorated to their lowest point in decades, with old treaties abandoned and new military technologies escalating tensions. Analysts warn that one wrong move could spark a direct confrontation between two nuclear superpowers, a scenario that could reshape global history forever. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, many believed his presidency would bring a thaw in US-Russia tensions, hoping his unorthodox approach was what was needed to break the diplomatic stalemate. During his campaign, Trump had repeatedly promised to open dialogue with Vladimir Putin, arguing that strong, personal diplomacy, not entrenched hostility, was the only path forward to de-escalate the growing danger. Indeed, in the early months of his new administration, both nations made cautious efforts to restore communication. High-level summits were arranged, and the two leaders met to discuss energy, security, and a new framework for bilateral cooperation. For a brief moment, it seemed a fragile optimism was taking hold on the world stage. But according to senior officials in Washington, Putin viewed Trump's outreach not as partnership, but as weakness. Moscow, emboldened by what it perceived as American leniency, began to push further into regions long seen as strategically vital to the West. Agreements were delayed, promises were broken, and tensions steadily climbed.
Russia is a paper tiger. Their economy is dangerously dependent on oil and gas, their Achilles heel.
Shortly after, the White House imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia's energy sector, blocking access to Western technology and cutting off dozens of oil and gas contractors from global markets.
You are waging economic terrorism. Try fighting a paper tiger.
Days later, reports emerged that several Russian nuclear submarines, armed with ballistic missiles, had been deployed toward the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Pentagon sources confirmed that US reconnaissance satellites had tracked the movement of Borei and Delta-class subs through Arctic waters, reaching positions from which they could target US soil in minutes. Officially, Washington stayed silent. Behind closed doors, however, the situation was boiling. According to insiders cited by Politico, fierce debate erupted within the National Security Council. Some advisors pushed for a massive new sanctions wave, an economic counterstrike. Others argued that any escalation could spiral out of control and urged restraint. Yet the presence of Russian nuclear assets so close to US shores has left the world in an extremely volatile state. For the first time in decades, Moscow appears to be using nuclear weapons not as deterrents, but as active tools of political pressure. This marks a profound shift. During the Cold War, an unwritten playbook governed superpower interactions, a delicate dance where both sides avoided such blatant provocations. But today, experts believe Putin is deliberately tearing up that playbook, testing how far he can push the line. He's gambling that a conflict-averse Washington won't risk a full-scale confrontation over what Moscow frames as its own sphere of influence. Adding fuel to the fire are growing rumors that Moscow is preparing to weaponize its economic leverage. Sources within OPEC Plus claim that Russian envoys have suggested slashing oil exports in direct response to US sanctions. This isn't just a retaliatory jab. It's a calculated move designed to inflict maximum pain, sending global energy prices skyrocketing and testing the resolve of the Western alliance. The reaction across Europe has been tense and divided. While Germany's government reportedly held emergency security meetings, advocating for de-escalation, other nations demand a more robust response. In a clear signal of American commitment, troops have been quietly redeployed to Poland and the Baltic states. Meanwhile, beneath the waves, a silent, dangerous game is playing out. The Times of London reports that British nuclear submarines have been dispatched to the North Atlantic to shadow Russian vessels. The stakes are now higher than at any time in the 21st century. Putin appears ready to take enormous risks for strategic leverage, while Trump, known for his unpredictability, is said to be growing increasingly frustrated by the challenge to American authority. In this volatile environment, officials fear that even a single misstep, a misread signal, or a public outburst could trigger a chain reaction that no one can control. Analysts are already comparing this standoff to the Cuban Missile Crisis, but with one critical difference. Back then, the Cold War had clear rules. Today, the geopolitical landscape is a fragmented maze, complicated by cyber warfare and hybrid threats where the old guardrails are gone. The risk of miscalculation is higher than ever. Meanwhile, China's role looms large. Officially, Beijing claims neutrality, but according to diplomatic leaks cited by the Financial Times, Chinese officials privately view Moscow's actions as a justified response to US aggression and a strategic opportunity to challenge American influence. State-run Chinese media have amplified this narrative, accusing Washington of manufacturing global instability. Reports suggest Beijing may soon expand its energy cooperation with Russia, helping Moscow offset US sanctions. This would create a sanctions-proof economic bloc, a move that further unites the two powers and challenges the petrodollar system. Global markets have already begun to tremble. Stock indices in New York and Europe have fallen sharply, while gold prices surged. Investors are fleeing to traditional safe havens like the Swiss franc and Japanese yen. With fears that Russia could cut oil exports, Brent crude has shot past $120 per barrel, raising the specter of a new 1970s-style energy shock for consumers worldwide. Even the United Nations is alarmed. The International Atomic Energy Agency warned that the movement of Russian nuclear submarines near US waters poses a grave threat to international security. The UN Security Council convened an emergency session, but divisions quickly paralyzed the talks. Russia and China blocked any resolution condemning Moscow's actions, rendering the body impotent as the US and its allies demanded the submarines' withdrawal. This confrontation has now expanded far beyond a bilateral standoff. Europe, China, and international institutions are all being drawn into the vortex. This complex web of alliances means the more actors involved, the greater the uncertainty, and the greater the danger of a crisis spiraling out of control. Experts increasingly warn that the world may be approaching a point of no return, a stage where a single incident, a single miscalculation, could ignite a full-blown global crisis. A cyber attack or an accidental military collision could be the spark that lights the fuse. What began as an economic dispute has evolved into something much more perilous. A contest for global dominance between nuclear powers, unfolding in real time. This is a stress test for the entire international order. The question haunting world leaders tonight is simple and terrifying. How close are we to the edge?